Perfect. Okay. And let me share my screen here. Sorry. I'm gonna have to rejoin. Unfortunately, we recorded a little too soon. I had to grant Zoom permission to share my screen, so I will be right back.
Steve, were you perchance smiling because you'd seen Salvo's message, or link rather?
I did.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it's maybe a little bit too dark or.
No, I can tell you that I will, after the meeting, I will download it and I'm going to put it on my Facebook page.
You know, if you follow the thread up to its source, there's a link to a service that lets you create whatever names you want for the Mexican Gulf.
Oh, right.
And,
well, Green Day posted something where they said the Gulf of American Idiot.
Yeah, I thought it was a little bit more clever to make it Amerishka.
Yes.
Okay. Share. Okay, perfect. There we go. Okay. Welcome everyone. I think we all know each other here, so I don't know if we need to do any introductions or anything like that. But agenda-wise, this is what I had on the agenda for today. Reviewing these PR updates on the specification. And then there was two main discussion points that I would like to kind of think about around extended support and also potentially package manager type integrations, but we could wait for next week. I was curious to kind of get Jordan's thoughts on this as well. So yeah. So anything else anyone else would like to discuss on this meeting today? All right. Perfect. So the specification is moving along, and I added all of the changes that were requested, from last week. And so let's see if I can see this. So one of them, what do we agree on with the RFC times, the timestamp? Actually, I can't remember.
I think the idea was to use whatever JSON schema uses.
Oh, okay, right.
Which I believe was the ISO standard.
Okay. Okay, perfect. I will still need to change that then, I believe. I didn't change that yet. So one thing that we briefly touched on last week was around the a schema field of some kind. Well, I think Jordan mentioned kind of a version field, but so you can put, for example, you can have a field that's a schema field, and then you can have it point to a JSON object that is the JSON schema for that version of what you're working on. And the reason that's nice is that one is that you can get like editor integrations for that, right? So in your IDE, so when you're editing fields, it can say, oh, that's incorrect. That's not following the schema. And then also it dually acts like what a version key would be for the actual schema, right? So you can have a version 1 is embedded into the URL. So, yeah, I think Jordan mentioned the only thing to be concerned about would be domain hijacking.
Yeah.
But-
I mean, we can, well, first of all, the schema isn't necessarily a URL. It's basically a name. And you can call it whatever you want. Now, if you do have a URL in there, most editors will try to fetch from that URL. However, realistically, it's just a name.
Okay.
And you can also, was it JSON? You can register. I think it's called Schema Store. I think. You can actually submit your schema to the JSON Schema Store, and that way you absolutely get, you know, native IDE integration. So like CycloneDX, you'll actually see that in there. So you go into Visual Studio Code or IntelliJ IDEA or, you know, whatever, you're going to see CycloneDX. It's natively supported in all of the editors.
Nice.
And we could do the same thing with CLE.
Why is the ID and the schema separate properties?
What's that?
You know, oh, can you see my screen right now?
Yeah. Oh, you know what? Maybe I'm talking out my oh, maybe I was getting those mixed up. Maybe it's the ID that's just the name.
I actually don't know.
I can't remember now. Now I'm confused. Maybe it's the ID that's just a name, and we're choosing to use the URL. I do know that if you put like relative paths, like for example, you know, on your local file system under schema, it'll actually resolve those relative paths as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, at least in I use IntelliJ, and that's what it does locally for me. So like I'm working on the 1.7 spec right now, and obviously that's not registered anywhere. So I'm literally just using local relative paths. Does that say it's a URL?
Yes.
That says it's a URI. The ID is a URI, which is correct.
Yeah.
It can basically be
Yeah.
anything, including a
Yeah.
URL.
Yeah. Which draft of the JSON? Oh, so schema is for the JSON schema standard itself. ID is for the schema of essentially your specification.
Your application.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So Cyclone is stuck on draft 7. I would recommend choosing the latest draft that's currently available. Because the way JSON schemas work is that once you get a lot of libraries actually supporting CLE, upgrading the version of JSON schema that you support is basically a breaking change. Because it's not a guarantee that those libraries that support CLE that use a JSON schema actually understand that latest and greatest version of JSON schema. So it has a downward effect on the ecosystem. Now we chose draft 7 at the time because this is, keep in mind, this was 2017, 28. No, it actually was later than that. We supported JSON schema a few years later. Anyway, 2020-ish. We chose draft 7, not because it was the latest, but because it was the most supported. And we wanted CycloneDX to be available across all of the major ecosystems that had available JSON schema parsers.
Supported in what way? By who exactly?
Supported by the libraries that implement JSON schema support.
Oh, okay.
So if you want to perform validation, for example, and you've got a later version of the JSON schema spec, well, your validator may not work.
Oh, I see. So supported at the time, basically. So
Yeah.
you might not go to the, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, JSON schema is one of these things where they've spent, 10 years under, doing the whole RFC thing. Then a few years ago, they decided, well, we're not getting anywhere with RFCs. It's taking too long. And now they're independent of that, but they still haven't released anything. So we still don't have a stable like 1.0 release that everybody can kind of rally behind.
Interesting.
That's a great validator, by the way.
Yeah, this is I've seen this one around, I believe.
Yeah.
So this is probably the most commonly used one, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's something to think about for sure.
Yeah. I would do maybe a little bit of research to find out
Yeah.
like what is the most supported JSON schema version that's available across all the various ecosystems, and then
Yeah.
choose that.
Right. Okay. Meeting bot action item for Benji to research JSON schema versions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So hopefully it gets that. Okay, perfect. So I will look into that. What else are we looking at here? So I can't remember what we reviewed on this specification so far. So please let me know if I'm going too slow. But basically, there's an event object. There's two top level keys. One is the events, which is an array of events, and then the other top level will be some sort of versioning schema, which I will need to change. And then within the event object, we have required fields that are required across all event types, which is the type of the event, the effective date when the event takes effect, and then published and modified fields for the events. And then we have all the event types defined. I was playing around kind of with the wording that we use around versions, I suppose. So you can have, it looks like this got cut off, but you can have versions or ranges, versions being an array of just simple strings, and ranges being an array of vars version range strings. So I'm trying to, when I'm thinking through this, I'm like trying to make sure that it's intuitive to people. Like when they look at it, they're like, okay, I need to use ranges or I want to use versions. So
is this where it would help to have an example or two?
yeah. So for example, you could have like this for an end of support. You might pass in a list of versions, individual versions. Let's say that your product does not use semantic versioning or any type of versioning scheme, right? You could pass in just strings, which are maybe the names of versions for your product, right? Like Microsoft Vista or something like that. And then the ranges, if you're using any sort of versioning schema that can support ranges, then you can use the vars formatted version ranges like this, right? Where you have the ecosystem and then the version range. So anything that's processing the CLE file should be able to read the version strings, understand what ecosystem we're looking at, and then be able to parse the the version ranges correctly based on the nuances of the ecosystem, essentially.
Now,
So
sorry,
yeah.
one other question.
Yeah.
You have the sort of general availability.
Yeah.
Do we actually sort of define what general availability is? And you must excuse me if I've actually sort of ever sort of raised this before.
Mm-hmm.
What we've got to say, for instance, is Maven version 4.
Mm-hmm.
It's had betas over months, or maybe even a couple of years now. It's now in release candidate. But
Mm-hmm.
in terms of general availability, I don't count that as actually being version 4. So how do you this is a question perhaps for Steve, would
Mm-hmm.
the verse specification allow you to automatically differentiate between release software and stuff which is alpha, beta, sort of release candidate or whatever, so that you don't get consumers of kind of CLE and other systems ever getting confused about what the latest version is? So as an example, currently dependency track will tell me that snapshot of this is the latest version, or it will tell me that this particular release candidate is the latest version when it's not. So
Right. Well, Semver supports alpha, beta, those types of things. So theoretically, yes.
so what you're saying is that the capability is basically implicit in CLE via CLE's support for VERS.
Right. Now, whether or not all ecosystems support this, that's another question, right? Semver itself does. And you can distinguish, you can have a range of even alpha releases or beta releases.
Yes.
If you so chose.
Yeah, so the Semver spec itself does say, like Steve was saying, that there's alpha and like release candidate versions. And it also tells you when analyzing the ranges, you know, what is included and how to order them as well. So, but each of the ecosystems will have a slightly different way of doing ranges. So some ecosystems might not. I don't know if they, yeah. But yes. I think that's the answer, right? Yes.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting when we actually get sort of like reference implementation so that the power can actually be demonstrated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all VERS doing the work here, though.
Yeah.
I mean, technically. But yes. But that's interesting point to raise. Yeah. Okay. Where were we? So yeah, I guess I would just like just requesting some feedback, I guess, about when you see this event object with ranges and versions. Can you think of perhaps a better way of arranging them? Does this look intuitive to you if you were a user? Or is there, maybe there's a more nested object that we should be using here? I don't know. I'm somewhat happy with it, but also I don't know. Ranges and versions seems like could be confusing. So, or if there's no strong opinions on it either, I can just think about it.
If I'm going to throw in a 1 calorie of thought, there are really only 2 use cases here, and that is if you have a version or you have multiple versions. And the multiple versions could be represented as a list of versions or as a version object or construct like you get with the verse URLs.
Mm.
And I think those are the 2 or 3 cases. And if you don't know the version, that would be an empty list. If it's only one version, a list would only include one version number. Wouldn't that be enough?
Yeah. So you mean like versions could be just an object, let's say, with or a list of objects?
Yeah. Or just a list of strings. And if if the string has a default or native version type, whatever that would mean, if it's somewhere, but we shouldn't even have a native one, in my opinion, though. But then you just have a list of those. And if it turns out there is something that starts with VERS colon and something, then that needs to be parsed. And you get an output out of the parsing.
That might be a good solution.
Yeah.
It's simple.
Yeah. I think I don't like how there's 2 keys essentially for very similar things. So yeah, let me think about that.
The other option, I mean, I like the simplicity of that, because I mean, VERS is basically a URI. So if you see that, like as Salvi said, you just parse it. And if not, you kind of move on. If you wanted to get, if you wanted to go the opposite way, I guess another option would be inside of versions would be an array of objects. Each object in that array could have a single range or a single version, and you just kind of enumerate those. That would be the other way. It's a lot more verbose. It's more statically typed, but it's more verbose.
Right. So in the object, you'd have a range, and then that would be VERS, or you would have just version, and then it would be the version.
Right.
Yeah. I like that. I like that. I like that because it's more explicit, right? The key is more explicit.
Yeah.
And then to Salve's point, we're also only using one key at the top level, which would be versions. So
one point of possible complexity is, and this is my interpretation of what VERS and package URLs are assume, and I haven't gotten any disconfirmation. So if it says VERS colon npm, I think the assumption is that the parsing or the bits after the / after npm is written in a way where the versions are possible to be parsed by native npm tooling, some library that you can find on npm.
Yes.
Which means if we're going to leave parsing to the tooling that reads this, they need somehow access to this tooling in order to interpret it correctly if it's going to be translated into a normalized manner somehow. If it's translated, that worse.
Yeah, the syntax is uniform, but the interpretation of how the range actually works is ecosystem specific.
Yeah. So if we need to know exactly the interpretation, what is the correct version, for some reason, putting it into a database, for example, and it has to be verified or that it's a strict type or something, then this becomes a can of worms.
Yeah, like NPM is like Semver-ish. It's mostly Semver.
Yeah, but NPM is fine, but then you have all the other ecosystems who have their own way of parsing versions and interpreting.
Debian, Red Hat, etc. Yeah,
and
it gets complicated.
The consuming application will have to kind of
they don't have to know VERS, right?
Yeah,
and hopefully there are libraries available that are starting to do this now.
Yeah,
is there?
I think I've seen some libraries starting to look at those, and I know for CPAN there's at least a module, but that to parse and produce those. but that one is limited to itself, basically. To the CPAN module knows about CPAN stuff, and we don't care much about external dependencies, though we kind of have to start caring about those eventually, since you can depend on things that exist out of the CPAN ecosystem. So this is a can of worms that will have to be handled at some point by all ecosystems, especially if they allow for example, foreign function interfaces, where you have some library that you want to make a wrapper for your native programming language, and that library could have its own versioning scheme going on, or however that happens. And so the worms are plenty in this can.
Yep, definitely. I mean, hopefully it gets solved once and it's solved for everyone, but yeah.
The day it's solved for everyone is the day when we have the one true language to rule them all.
Oh, you mean black speech? Now,
no.
English. English.
But anyway, here's a question. So I think I recalled Steve at a recent meeting talking about the Ecma approval process, where basically at some point prior to going to the General Assembly, you need to have tooling?
No, we do not have to have tooling. I mean, it would be great if we did, but no, the process is essentially this task group is responsible for presenting and working with TC54 and getting consensus in TC54 on what it is that this spec is going to be. Once that is done, TC54 promotes this to the Ecma executive committee. They review it, and then as a formality, they recommend that to the General Assembly. Now, that is generally a 2 or 3 month window where that needs to happen. So typically, we want to, if we want to get a specification released at a specific General Assembly timeframe, we typically need to get it in the hands of the Ecma executive committee 2 months before the General Assembly, generally speaking.
Yeah, so the reason I was asking was that, there's plans, isn't there, to have a hackathon at OWASP in May in Barcelona, correct?
Yep.
Well, could that include CLE? Would there
Sure,
be?
it could.
Yeah.
If we have a beta or pre-beta, like if we have something that we think is going to work and we want people to hack on that, sure, why not?
I feel very naughty saying that now that I know that I won't be able to be there myself, but hey, throwing it out there.
I thought you signed up for work, Mark. Come on.
No, as I said, my company won't pay for international travel, so I can't go.
Oh, maybe we can figure out a way to do it remotely as well. I don't know.
Oh, that'd be cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know when NTIA and CISA did some hackathons a while back, they actually had them hybrid type of events.
Nice.
So we might want to consider doing something like that. I need to talk to Star about that here in the next week or two.
What is the T hackathon going to look like?
It's
like we're
we're expecting about a dozen or so people.
Okay.
Open source projects, commercial vendors, etc. But basically, we're going to be, I believe, initially focusing on the discovery and the initial finding of the products through the collections and off through the leaves. I believe is kind of the scope of what it is that we're going to be looking for. Now, once you actually have the collections and the leaves and stuff, I mean, if we had CLE available for a product, right? Because CLE is specific to a product, not necessarily a project version. It's specific to a product. So if we have a collection, then theoretically we could also get the CLE for that if it was available.
Mm,
So if we had like a mock-up of what we think this is going to look like,
yeah.
then yeah, we could participate in that hackathon.
Nice.
Now the insights is not going to be done, I don't believe, in time for that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try, but I don't think it's I don't think it'll be ready.
Mhm.
But if CLE is ready, then that would be great.
Okay. Cool.
And we'll
Yeah,
try
we
to
should
make it
definitely think
virtual
about that.
or yeah, we'll try to make it hybrid. I don't know what the logistics are for that. Are
Mhm.
you going to be in Barcelona, Benji, or no?
No, I wasn't planning to, but
Okay,
if you want to buy me a airplane ticket or anything, I'd for sure.
right on. The plane tickets are really expensive, as is the hotels, because the F1
Yeah.
is the week after.
Oh, nice. You could extend your stay a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do.
So just on the VERS stuff still, is there currently any client libraries for
Oh yeah,
VERS that you know? Oh yeah.
yeah. There's several libraries. There's one in Java that Nicholas had written. There's one in
Mm-hmm.
Python that Philippe Oberdan has written,
Mm-hmm.
or either Philippe or one of those people that work for
Mm-hmm.
him. I think there's a JavaScript one as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a few.
Okay.
I don't know what level of maturity they're at right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know they support VERS,
Mm-hmm.
but obviously VERS supports a lot of different ecosystems, just like Perl does. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what level of support in terms of like, do they do Debians, right? Do they
Mm-hmm.
do epoch style versioning? I have no idea.
Oh, I see. I see. I would love to check out some of the libraries actually, but I can't
Yeah.
find them is the problem.
Reach
So
out to Philippe and reach
okay.
out to Nicholas Duster.
Okay. I
Would
will
it
do
be
that.
would it be possible to basically create kind of some bogus products where you can actually demonstrate sort of functionality where, one of the whole things about CLE is change of name. Well, what happens if you halfway through this, you've actually got a change of version format just to make sure that things don't fall over? As I said, it's not intended to be sensible. It's merely intended to quickly be able to run through a whole pile of edge cases.
Yeah, I mean the obvious one is like, Windows 95 and Windows 10, right? Windows 10 is newer. Like what kind of logic yeah, I don't know. I don't even know how you would describe that programmatically, honestly. I don't know. I mean, it's marketing people being marketing people. Um,
You
I don't even
can't
know how I would represent that.
you can't really represent it chronologically, I think, based on the versions names alone for a lot of, like, for example, Microsoft products or things like that, right? So you just have to use version strings to do the matching, right? And that's as good as you can get, I think.
Yeah, I'd point out that for the longest time, I could not work with Firefox on my corporate VPN because it required that the version needs to be higher than, say, 91. And as soon as it got to a version 100, it thought that the 100 was a lower version than 91.
That's funny. That's a bug.
Wow. Okay. So the version ranges stuff we're going to change. What else can we go over here? I included the different event types from the original CLE doc that we have, just the difference between version events and component events. And then this is an example of kind of what the schema would look like for a bunch of different events. And so any comments here so far?
Not yet.
Okay.
I think one thing that would be useful, and not today, but because I personally have to jump, but
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing that would be useful maybe next time around
Mm-hmm.
is actually going through the details of the schema that you have
Mm-hmm.
here,
Mm-hmm.
all the use cases that we said we would support,
Mm-hmm.
making sure we have feature parity with what we've said we were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And once that's done, go through the actual text. And at this point, you know, obviously if there's no gaps and, that sort of thing, at this
Mm-hmm.
point, then I think we need to start thinking about how we're going to start populating the Ecma docs, actually
Mm-hmm.
starting working on the Ecma documentation of the actual standard. Because I think we have a lot of the pieces in place to already start doing this. But
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think the two outstanding things for me are still figuring out like distribution wise. Where like basically just reducing some of the risk of some things. And the risk for me at least is around usage, right? And so distribution, the risk around how people will use it, like package managers, or like how are we going to make sure that it will get adoption by package managers, by by people just using it randomly. So
I would
that's
recommend maybe maybe at another meeting, I would recommend maybe talking about distribution,
mhm,
learning from what CSAF did, learning what
mhm,
works and what doesn't, because trust me, they have a bunch of stuff in there that doesn't work.
mhm,
But I would try to reuse stuff that already exists. For example,
mhm,
maybe cle.json as
mhm,
a as a file format. If you see it on the file system, that's what you have, or
mhm,
something that maybe is suffixed with something
mhm,
like product name -cle.json, for example.
mhm,
Actually come
mhm,
up with some file naming conventions,
mhm,
but also start talking about how you can represent this in .well knowns. So for example,
mm,
.well known slash SBOM, well, that gives me the SBOM. .well
yeah,
known slash CLE, maybe that's what gives me the lifecycle information, or maybe it's .well
yeah,
known slash lifecycle. I don't know.
yeah,
But there's ways to distribute this that other people have thought about that
mhm,
don't involve the Transparency Exchange API. We just
yeah,
need
yeah,
to
yeah,
put those ways in the specification.
Cool. So what you're saying is that today I could go to Maven Central and see a release of a software that's got, a sort of POM job and all of the hashes and stuff, but no SBOM. And then I go to a different product, like one of the Apache things, maybe one of the Commons projects in a few months' time, and suddenly SBOM start to appear. And then a couple of months later, CLE JSON starts to appear in the
Right.
same place. Am I understanding it right?
Yeah, but I mean, Maven has its own conventions, which is fine. They're one of the only ecosystems that do have mandatory conventions like that. Most ecosystems do not. But keep in mind that CLE, for the most part, is likely going to be used by commercial vendors. So how would Oracle, for example, publish CLE information? Well,
mhm,
well known slash lifecycle or CLE, or
Yes.
whatever we come up with, right, might be a way that they would do that.
Would it be, yeah, would it be helpful as well to maybe test the CLE a little bit, like take
That's what the
products?
hackathon at Thor.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Is taking products and trying to kind of um, put them into the CLE to make sure that like I have an existing product and I want to define the events for it. So yeah,
I can reach out to, I mentioned Oracle because
yeah,
I know the director of product security over there really well. I've helped them. They've adopted CycloneDX. I've helped them a lot with package URL. I can probably try to talk to him and maybe get one of his team members to kind of help with this work as well, because they have thousands of products and they
Yeah.
probably have a vested interest in doing something like this. So
Yeah,
I
totally.
can certainly make that connection if you like.
Yeah.
One question as an aside, are there commercial products today which actually provide life cycle information basically as part of their intelligence, in other words, part of the value that they deliver to you? So I'm thinking, as an example, it might be, say, the life cycle product from Sonotype. So I actually happen to have used Nexus IQ, but not since about 2016. And they were always trying to say, oh, you need to have a life cycle, but I never did try it. So I don't know what it actually offers. But it still prompts me to ask the question, hold on, aren't there people out there, like for instance Sonotype, who have actually already got a huge kind of a database of valuable to them data from which they derive sort of commercial value, and suddenly that value would be undercut by the success of CLE?
Yeah, I think that's true. There's definitely companies that, you know, that have that data. My previous company, for example, was doing that. So yeah, there are definitely companies that are collecting this life cycle data. Yeah. So yeah, it would be, you know, I think it actually, it makes their job easier. It doesn't necessarily undercut them, because I still think that there's a potentially business case for some sort of aggregator of life cycle events that might not, or maybe there's open source versions, right? Or maybe an open source version will come along, because it's so much easier now to create this aggregation. And so potentially, I really don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's good to think that Steve reckons that we're getting close to having something ready.
Yes. So the goal is always, is ready by August 1st, I think, is our North Star. So
well, if you want to have a mention of the hackathon, remember that that's end of May.
yes, that's a good point. Hackathon is end of May. But it would be really great to get it into the hands of people to try and use it, right? Kind of battle test it a little bit.
And now you know Ule, don't you?
Yes.
So I'm pretty sure it'd be he who's organizing that hackathon.
Okay.
Sure, but I mean, he's easy to ping and find out, to confirm.
Okay. I will message him. So I think we have about 10 minutes here. The extended support stuff is something that I wanted to discuss. And extended support is interesting. I think it'll be interesting for Salve. But it's interesting because you can have different companies that offer extended support for a product that is not their own, right? So, you know, the CLE may be, so we've always treated the CLE as kind of, you know, I guess a primary document that might be released by a vendor or something like that. But it could also be, you could have a CLE from someone who just supports a product, right? Perhaps you're not saying that, you know, you don't have like a general availability events, or you might not have marketing events or things like that, but you might have things related to the support. So yeah, so it's interesting. And the other thing is that the extended support can have different levels of support, right? So I'm yeah.
Let me throw in some thoughts here.
Okay.
In the sustainability working group, we made a list of things that a project might want to need help with. Meaning a long list of activities. Say, for example, I would like to create a video presentation. Please, somebody do some editing for me. Or I need somebody who is good at user interface work and user experience. Please help me make my web service look better, even if it's open source. And one of those points that I've added recently is for the maintainer of an open source package to say, I'm interested in finding commercial entities who are willing to offer commercial support on my behalf, or create a deal or something like that. So in a sense, that is what you're talking about, except before. It's in addition to the expected type of support or the whatever is provided by this project itself. With that said, this is mostly from an like a ecosystem component perspective. If there's a fully fledged product out there who has an open source project, but they don't have the willingness or capability to commercialize this project, then I think this scenario could apply to them also. So I'm not entirely sure, is this like a scenario that you have in mind here, or is this not realistic? What do you think?
Sorry, can you summarize it a little bit more for me?
Yeah, summarize. Okay, in the last 2 minutes. So I'm thinking about the perspective of somebody who publishes an open source project that wants to take steps towards commercializing it. They say, so for example, here's a made up scenario. Somebody writes a nice little CRM framework just for fun, maybe because they are part of a local volunteer effort and they have lots of commercial users that they need to keep track of. And at some point, since this person is the owner, they say, maybe this is something I could earn a living from. Instead of getting wages from some corporation, they say, I want to make a living out of this open source project. But taking steps in that direction is insanely complicated, because there's a lot of things you have to suddenly care about, like regulation, taxes, creating customer relationships, special needs, and suddenly this balloons into an enormous thing that it might be put off to lots of people, and certainly for most random geeks who just want to code. So being able to say, if there's somebody out there with experiences in creating businesses or an existing businesses that would be willing to try to offer support or hosting or whatever, then please reach out to me.
I see.
So that's a scenario we're looking at in the sustainability working group, as making it possible to take smaller steps towards commercialization of an open source project. Say, for example, by involving some other party or a user or some other ways of doing things, like creating opportunities for that at least.
Interesting.
And I'm thinking, in your case here, could you get back to the page that you included the text that you want to discuss?
Oh, which one was it again?
I've
forgotten now.
It was a list of items where to do. Think about extended support.
Yes.
Extended support is support that is offered beyond a regular support date. It's still like this is still something which makes it even more interesting for a commercial party to offer this kind of situation. So if they offer commercial support for something that is currently or indemnification or hosting that is currently in support, that's fine. But the opportunity to say this is also there is an option for extended support after end of support date, then what I'm saying here is this can be used by open source authors also. If there's a URL there that points to the entity that is offering these different types of support, for example, sign up page or become a customer or page or whatever.
That is interesting. That is interesting. I think I like that last point. But I think some of it might be out of scope. I think the primary goal of the CLE should always be communication between the producer of software and between the end user of software,
right?
Rather than between the producer of software and potentially someone that might provide support for that software. So, but I do like the last point. That one was very interesting, where it's, you could have some sort of information about support options, right, within the CLE.
Yeah, and for me, the meaningful thing here is that this opens for taking smaller steps, not just offering yes or no, but for somebody who is about or wishes to commercialize a product or monetize it. Maybe that's a better word. That they have a way to do it with a soft on ramp instead of really a steep learning curve. And we don't have to talk about how the potential third party who could offer such support, how they get involved. This and as your point is, this isn't about reaching out to them, but if they have existing customers, that third party that uses this software product, those customers uses that other product which they don't support, and they get questions from their customers, could you also support that one? And they see there's a file there saying, I'm looking for people who can help create commercial support options. Then we have a matchmaking going on here, which I think would be super beneficial.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I would like to, I think for the extended support for V1, just so to keep it simple, I think it would make sense to just focus on maybe like primary support, like by the manufacturer of software, I think. But I'm happy to discuss that, I think.
Yeah,
we probably don't have time today, but I would like to discuss kind of that next week.
If the link to the support terms, conditions pays is a link, if this support field, extended support field, contains a link, then strictly speaking, the link could go anywhere, either to the first party or second party or whatever.
Yeah. So what I want to discuss next week is around this, for example. So end of support, like what does that mean, right? In the context of extended support, how do we show that this is the end of support for a specific support level, right? So, yeah, I would like to discuss that at the next meeting, but we will have to It's somewhat of an edge case, but it does happen with a lot of software where there's a manufacturer, not as much in open source, obviously, end of support, typically there's no extended support options, but for stuff like Red Hat, right, like more commercial software, obviously you'll be having extended support levels, and you'll need to support it, right? So,
quickly, a super interesting thing to add there would be what level of support is being transitioned into when you come to that date, because it might go into being unsupported or casually supported or something else, and just having that point there would make it, you could make whatever transition you want that way, and I think that would go.
Now here's a question. I was today finding out that we've been building Docker containers using OpenJDK. Ceased support for version 8 at 8U221 about 5 years ago. And the thing is, because it was configured to pull in the latest version of the image, it stopped dead and nobody realized. Now, the thing is, my understanding is that there is actually, if you pay for it, there's extended support, and we could have continued. But here's the question, okay? OpenJDK from, I think it's from Oracle, or is it from OpenJDK organization? I'm not quite clear of the thing is, it's not your only choice. So you could seamlessly switch across to something like Temurin or Azul and carry on without needing extended support. But how would you know that?
That you wouldn't. That is a very interesting edge case.
That goes into how to specify what languages or language implementations you support in your application. Like if you can run on OpenJVM or it's Xamarin, was it you said? Like and which versions are supported of those? That means you have a dependency requirement that is unstated, actually.
Now, in fact, I went back and I found some of my documentation. This Niklas Duster, he gave me a lot of useful information, insights about how you're actually using the OpenJDK. Makes it not matter. So if you're running, say, for instance, Temurin in a container, it can have sort of technical implications. But if you're running it on bare iron, the only reason why you would actually prefer one over the other might, at the end of the day, merely boil down to ideological reasons. In other words, you'd prefer to do business with Temurin because it's Eclipse, and so it's like a kind of coalition of companies, as opposed to Azul, where you're getting it for free, but it's actually a company. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So, but the thing is, as I said, effectively they're the same thing from, to all extents and purposes. And there are choices you can make. So the choices that you need to make, in my case, is I've got to get rid of the sort of the usage of the original sort of OpenJDK. I have to switch to something where a version of Java 8 is available. OpenJDK Java 8 is available. And then, of course, quite separately, I have to start getting a baseball bat out and hitting our developers until they start supporting a more recent version of Java.
It sounds pretty fun.
Oh yeah, it's always fun. The thing is that I repeat what I said at the beginning. The realization that there was this problem took years until I happened to just look at it and say, hold on a second, that's not right. So there is a need for CLE to actually be able to represent the fact that I got a problem. But then the question is, how would I know what the solution is unless there's ability to create some kind of loose coupling, as it were? And I don't even know if that's the right word.
Definitely. It definitely seems out of scope of the first iteration of CLE. I think definitely the focusing on like just telling you what's wrong is probably, but I think we'll get there.
Well, that's the Pareto principle. Just telling
Yeah.
you that it's wrong.
There you
is
go.
So important.
Yeah, exactly.
Stepping stone to actually looking at it and saying, oh, well, no. Yeah. Okay.
I gotta jump off, but
Okay.
thank you guys for coming this week.
Righty-ho.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, dokie,
Yeah.
then. Bye-bye.
See ya.